Gee willikers, Paul, we both chose bookcases as our backgrounds, didn't we?
Absolutely, every time. It's only appropriate.
There you go. So I'm Luann Walker. I teach memoir in the program. And Paul?
I'm Paul Harding. I teach fiction writing and Shakespeare in the Old Testament and all the contemporary stuff.
And just to give you a tiny précis about what's happening tonight, Paul, you want to just tell people what we're going to be doing?
Yes, we have a hit parade of faculty members here, and we are all going to read to you very fairly brief pieces, but we're going to just go straight through. And so you'll be just handed off from one delight to the next.
And we have Frank Imperial, who is in charge of all the tech stuff. Thank goodness, because I'm not good at that. You all may be, but not me. So thank you, Frank. And we're delighted to introduce you to Paul. You want to introduce our MC?
One of our wonderful MFA students, Trumaine Sherry, who will be MCing the rest of the reading.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
So like Paul and Luann said, today is a special edition of Writer Speak, and everyone here is a faculty member at the Creative Writing and Literature program at Stony Brook. Our first reader today is Susan Meinet. She is the author of short fiction, novels, and poetry. Her books include the titles 30 Girls, Evening, and Rapture, among others. Her acclaimed short story collection, Why I Don't Write, was published just last year. She is also one of my favorite professors that I have this year.
Okay, I'm not going to turn that down, Trumaine. Thank you. I thought I would read something from one of my older books. It's called 30 Girls, and it's set in Eastern Africa, in Uganda. And it sort of at the heart of it is an event that actually took place in 1996 when a group of boarding school girls were kidnapped by the Lord's Resistance Army and taken off into the bush. 139 of them were stormed in the middle of the night. And one of the nuns, the Italian nuns who ran this school in the north of Uganda, went after to, as she said, bring her girls back. So this is part of the true story. And in that true story, she caught up with the girls who were with this sort of ragtag bunch of rebels, as they called themselves. So they were actually sort of marauding robbers, really. And she said, give me my girls back. And the man who was in charge said, I'll give you 109 back, but I'm keeping 30. And she said, no, I need to take them all. And he said, sort of deal or no deal. So a lot of this book that I wrote is about what happened to those 30 girls. And it centers particularly on one girl named Esther. And I'm just going to read a very short bit of Esther's trial. It's awful what she goes through, so I'm not giving you a cheerful offering here, but I do think that one way we can sort of take in, I would say, the experience of others, the suffering of others, is to truly try to imagine their experience. Now, I know this gets into a lot of weeds these days about what you're allowed to write about or not. So I thought I would just go right forward and read what I wrote. It took days of walking to get to Sudan. That's where the LRA brought the girls because they had across the border a receptive government. We traveled in a small group, about 50 of us. The rebels were about 20. Most of the girls of St. Mary's were with us. I walked by Louise, Agnes, she was near Charlotte. One boy with us, very thin, died on the way. You think by then you would be accustomed to long journeys, but we never got used to it. We filled the splits in our feet with mud, then walked, then filled the splits again. At night, we collected leaves to sleep on. Sleeping, the girls stayed close. In the morning, before opening your eyes, you might hear a rooster, and be sure that the walls of your room were around you with your cross on the wall and your jacket on the hook. And then opening your eyes had a moment before you understood the ceiling above you was branches and white sky and leaves like shriveled paper. Then you would remember, I am in this other life. One day we passed through my grandmother's village. The rebels did not know I knew this village. Fortunately, we did not stop there. You are thinking about home when you are crying. Did God see where we were? I wondered. Did God see into Sudan? Louise said there was too much evil in the camps, so God would not look at us anymore. What kind of God is that? I would wonder. Then I stopped wondering. I tried instead to stay alive. I am alive now and can breathe, and that is as much as I know. Why one person should die this day and another be permitted to live, who knows it? If I ask the questions now, I still do not have an answer. If God was watching Sudan, then he was allowing for these things to be so. In that case, I say, God let us down. He forgot the children of the north. He forgot Tabitha, the girl from Arum in the red ruffled shirt. She was even looking at the rebels without hate. You saw no hate in her eyes. And what happened to her? She was tied to a tree till the rope sank into her skin. You see these things, and it is hard to think God is good. Still, I prayed. You get into the habit of praying. It comes when things are hard, so what can I tell you? At first I prayed to God, then soon I was praying, not even to God, just to no one. It was just prayers going out to the air. I prayed for us girls to escape. I prayed to see my mother again, prayed to be able to fight again with my sisters, prayed to greet my father. I thought I would be happier this time when I saw him. I prayed to be with my Philip. I would think, please, please, please. That was a prayer. And I had to start praying for Agnes. She was not always well, and I worried she would become more sick. After a while, I saw my prayers were not helping. And I said to myself, I must do something. Then I remembered this man, Chunga, and I had an idea of a thing I might do more than just pray.
Really great. Thank you, Susan. Our next reader will be Molly Gaudry. Molly Gaudry is the author of the novella We Take Me Apart, which was shortlisted for the Asian American literary finalist. So, Molly, would you take it away?
Thank you, Trumaine. Susan, that was really great. Thanks. All right, so I'm going to read tonight from my first book, We Take Me Apart. There's really not much that you need to know, just that this is the part where the narrator is leaving home for the first time to follow the person that has promised her the world. I had never seen snow, but I had heard, dreamed, imagined great pillows of it, warm as a tongue. Imagine my surprise when, on our journey from mother's home to yours, you took me on a boat from which we looked for whales. The only boat I had ever touched was paper, folded by mother's hands, 2 twigs tucked in as representations of her, me. You were furious with our captain, but I was delighted. The great cut-shaped mounds were wondrous as anything I had ever seen in chunks like chocolate. I could have eaten them. I was so happy. Happier still when the waves pounded all sides of the boat and below deck the crash of our bodies woke us. Happiest when at last we disembarked. It was raining, it was light, it was fresh. When I remember you, that is what I remember. It was raining, it was light, it was fresh, it was fall. It was wet red leaves stuck in clumps to the bottoms of my canvas sneakers and your rubber galoshes. We shared a menthol cigarette from the freezer, walked hand in hand to the corner store for butter, for pancakes beneath a bright yellow umbrella the morning after our midnight arrival to your home. You took me in your arms and said, "Welcome home," and it was all of it delicious. We were open mouths on mouths, hands on inner thighs, fingers spreading toward action, fingers spreading like rhubarb in the garden. We were on the porch attached to the kitchen, and I turned my head into the night and saw the rhubarb poking through the soil, and I felt like the soil. And your tongue felt like the rhubarb, and your tongue felt like the so slow melting or shaving of the ice from the mountain, and its edges broke into song and snow that settled as a soil blanket tucked wet and warm, and it was only your tongue between us then. And in my throat, I felt we were 2 lakes meeting for the first time at the open mouth of a river, and you were no longer stern and unfamiliar, but consuming and radiant, and I felt consumed, and I felt radiant. Beneath our bodies, a loose plank that sounded like the click of 2 spoons in a creaky drawer sliding open. I felt beneath you like you were the drawer and I was a spoon. I felt beneath you like you were a spoon and I was an egg, ready to hatch. Thank you.
Really great. Thank you, Molly. Our next reader is Robert Lopez. Robert is the author of, among other works, the novel Part of the World. His work has been listed among the most 25 important books of the decade by HTML Giant. His nonfiction and poetry have appeared in Bomb, the 3 Penny Review, and the Norton Anthology of Sudden Fiction Latino. Take it away, Robert.
Okay, thank you, Trumaine. It's really a pleasure to be with everyone tonight. I'm going to read a very short fiction that appeared in a book called Asunder a bunch of years ago. It's called In a Boat About to Drown. Boats don't drown, people drown. Boats sink. Something happens, then boats take on water, then they sink. They sink right to the bottom. The people on the boat try to keep the boat from sinking. They take measures. They use words like bow, stern, starboard, and port. These words mean front, rear, right, and left. They use these words all the time, even when the boat is not sinking. When the boat is sinking, they take measures. They make calls. They might even bail water. Then they put on life jackets. Then they float around until someone comes by to pick them up. The people who come by to pick them up are called rescuers. They know to come by because they have been signaled. They are signaled through direct radio contact or by Morse code. Morse code in telegraphy is a series of dots and dashes that indicate different letters of the alphabet. SOS is the most famous code sent, which means save our ship. People say it doesn't actually mean save our ship, but what do they know? Mayday means the same thing. Why is not clear. It might have something to do with French. Rescuers are given positions of longitude and latitude. They say that rats are the first ones off a sinking ship, but unless they are extraordinary swimmers, it does them little good. The people rescued are called survivors. They are called the lucky ones. The unlucky ones are called victims. These are the people who are subject to float around with no one coming by to pick them up. Sharks attack them, or the sun beats down on them, or else it is freezing cold and they get what is called hypothermia. Hypothermia is a state of reduced body temperature wherein all bodily functions are slowed. Then they freeze to death. Then they are recovered. People can either be rescued or recovered, survivors or victims. However, there are victims who are never recovered, their bodies. These are the people lost at sea. There are songs written about them. Boats are lost at sea too. They are mentioned in the same songs. Drowning is different. Drowning is for people who can't swim or who can no longer swim due to injury or exhaustion, or people who choose not to swim. Something happens, then they take on water, then they drown. They sink right to the bottom. The water can be deep or shallow, rough or calm. There is little difference. Water fills the lungs, making life at first difficult, then impossible to sustain. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Our next reader is going to be Susan Scarf Merrill. Susan is the author of Shirley, a novel, which was made into an award-winning major motion picture starring Elizabeth Moss. Writing has appeared most recently in the New York Times, Newsday, and the Los Angeles Review of Books.
Thanks, Trumaine. And Robert, it was really fun to hear that story, which I read and loved, and to hear it in your voice it was just wonderful. It's great to be here. I am going to, for not the first time, read the first chapter of a novel in progress, partly because it keeps changing so much that it remains fascinating to me how you can take one scene and just keep tightening it and tightening it. And so I just want to share it for the 11,000th time. So this book is called The Followers, and this is chapter 1, the very beginning. It was a still harvesting tomatoes sort of day. None of the leaves had turned, but you could tell fall was coming, the way the dry grass whiskered on the slope behind the house, and the dog remained perky in the afternoon heat. Crickets combed their legs noisily, certain this weather would go on forever, but birds had started leaving, pointed arrow swarms of geese heading south, wings beating against the smoothly spread clouds in the northern Connecticut sky. And then Phil Crane called. This had never happened before, so I knew the news was bad. Phil was the police chief back in Helion, where we'd been raised, and I thought it might be one of Danny's parents, and my heart was already tightening as I picked up the phone. Bella, Phil said, I couldn't reach you at the house, and so I called the vet clinic. I talked to Danny. I'm sorry to disturb you at work. His voice was formal and strange, as if he wanted me to forget I'd seen him doing keg stands out at the lake or crying on the football field the day his leg was shattered. I stood at the window, phone at my ear. Danny's truck bumped up the driveway as we spoke, and now I watched Danny in the driver's seat, watching me. It's Cress Milligan, Phil said. She's gone. Gone, I repeated stupidly. An accident on Route 8 north of Helion near Torrington. The car was totaled. She missed the new turn. She was in Helion? She hasn't ever come back. Why would she go there? Who did she see? Well, that's the thing. She came back and now she's dead? I don't believe it. Well, that's the thing, he repeated. What is? The thing is, you're her next of kin, on the ID in her wallet. Me? His silence was respectful. Eventually, I asked again, thinking I had to have misunderstood. It's been 14 years, I said. I haven't talked to her once. I don't even know where she lives. He made a clicking sound with his tongue. Maybe he was looking for the address in his paperwork. Do her parents, I began, but Phil interrupted. They were both dead, he told me, buried in New Haven at the family plot. I hadn't even known her parents passed, I said, surprised I hadn't heard. There's a husband. Where's he? Divorced. Huh, I said. Phil cleared his throat. I remembered what a silent giant of a teenager he'd been, awkward except when he ran down the field, silent except when he shouted for the ball. You'll have to come down here in the morning. Why? The body, Phil said. The medical examiner needs you to confirm it's Cress. You knew her. Isn't that enough? I'm sorry, Phil said. Danny was out of his truck now, the door slamming hollowly, lips pressed together, shoulders taut, preparing. I can't do it. I haven't seen her in years. I'm sorry. Under the regret, there was a steely insistence. Was it bad? You'll recognize her. He covered the phone so that a brief conversation was muffled, but I could tell he'd been surprised. Hold on, he said. More muffled conversation. Sorry, Bella. There was a book. We found it outside the car. It must have blown out the window when she crashed. Not bashed up. It happens sometimes. It's inscribed to you. I'll give it to you when you come in. A book for me? Baby Bella, my Isabella, he said. Who else could it be? But why would she write to me? He cleared his throat, but still his voice was raspy. I'll save the book for you. It's got to be you. I had no words, no feelings, except I needed to get off the phone. We scheduled you for 9 tomorrow morning. The medical examiner is meeting us at the hospital. Danny says he'll come with you. I'm sorry, Bella. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Our next reader will be Christian McLean. Christian is a fiction writer and poet. His fiction has been published in the Rumpus, Scores Anthology, and the Southampton Review. His poetry has been featured at the Dundee Contemporary Arts Museum in Scotland. Christian?
Hey, Trumaine, thank you so much for hosting. This is really wonderful just to see all of our faculty and hear them read their work. The piece I'm going to read is a little old. You can tell because the only piece of information you will need is that TWA used to be an airline. So it's called Airplanes. Airplanes. All he had were airplanes. We were at the beach lying on plastic lounge chairs behind the wooden shacked cabana where I spent my summers. Like always, I wasn't working a summer job. I spent my time 100 or so yards from the Atlantic Ocean doing nothing. I smelled like Coppertone 30. It didn't have the same scent as the 10 or even the 15 that all the bronze baby boomers wore. There was no tropical coconut or pina colada seeping from my skin. The smell was noticeable. Even when the smell had lessened, you could still tell by my glimmering white body that I was wearing it. Steve didn't believe in sunblock. He sat shirtless, ball cap pulled down over his eyes, smoking a cigarette, enjoying his day off. Can't believe you woke me up this morning, I said. It was noon. I was still sleeping. Sorry to inconvenience you, but I've been up since 6:30. You're my hero. Why'd you ever get out of work anyway? Gas leak. I'm sure you had nothing to do with that. Steve worked summer jobs at this elementary school in town and he hated it. Even worse, he hated not having money. So he worked and his mother yelled at him because he wasn't taking it seriously. She yelled at him because he was out until 4 a.m. and about how he slept on the job and because he never washed his dishes and because of his flight books. And they were all over the basement. Everything was true. Most outstanding were the flight books. They were everywhere. In front of the washing machine, the shoe boxes, in the stairwell, and all the way up the staircase to the door. They were stacked 3 or 4 high in some places, scattered in others, but all in immaculate condition. TWA DC-10 going to Tampa, he said. What? Up there, you see the red tail? Yeah. That's how you tell it's a TWA. So how do you know it's a DC-10 and how the hell do you know it's going to Tampa? Well, it has one engine on each wing and one on the tail, which could be easily confused as an MD-11, but that hasn't been introduced into commercial fleets just yet. Therefore, we're making it a DC-10 and it's 2:58. There are TWA flights to Tampa at 7:38, 10:15, 2:42, and 6:12 every day from JFK. It was probably delayed a few minutes, but it's definitely going to Tampa. If it had left at 3, I would have said it was going to Miami. They leave every 4 hours on the hour starting at 7 o'clock. Who are you? I had no idea if he was right or not, but I would believe it all. He was ardent about planes. It wasn't so much the physics of flying, but where they were going and what time they were leaving. He had no desire to learn about jet propulsion or hydraulics. It was simpler than that. Thank you.
Thank you. I love the way you read dialogue. You do that really well, the back and forth. Enjoyed that piece a lot.
Thank you.
Our next reader is Karen Bender. Karen is a novelist and short story writer. Her short story collection, Refund, was a finalist for the National Book Award, and her latest collection, New Order, was longlisted for the Story Prize. Karen, it's all you.
Oh, thank you, Trumaine. This was just a real joy to be here and listening to all this incredible work. I'm gonna read a new short story. It's a flash fiction. I'll just read part of it. It's from a new collection I'm working on, which is a collection of speculative stories. So this is called The Shame Exchange. No one knew who originally proposed it. The government would mandate an exchange of shame. Citizens who held too much shame, which interfered with their lives and productivity, would come to an official site where their shame would be handed to a government official who had none. Many people in both the federal and technology sectors were involved in organizing this exchange and had not been easy to agree on the terms. The government was for years not sufficiently responsive to the needs of its citizens, and this is what a panel finally decided to do. The citizens would be selected by lottery and interviewed, and those who were unduly burdened by their shame would be asked to participate. Psychologists had created a technique in which they could detect a person's shame and make it a physical hulking thing. It was generally the size of a large pillow and resembled a raw steak. Before this exchange, selected citizens stored their shame in a refrigerator, carefully packaged by medical professionals, and would presented this in this controlled environment to those who had none. The meeting would take place in a large warehouse somewhere in the middle of the nation. Though there was much interest in the details of this exchange, who gave what to whom, etc., no one outside the participants would be allowed to watch. The event would be heavily guarded. No one was allowed to meet or speak to one another. Everyone was instructed to wear a mask, a simple plastic one constructed in the shape of a lion, dog, rabbit, and other animals to conceal their identity. They would all be told to dress professionally for the exchange, but including suitable for an office. The shame would be transferred between ordinary citizens and officials in the government. Elected officials would be required to undergo a test. Those officials whose shame did not reach a certain appropriate and decent level were ordered to the warehouse at the appointed time. Every member of the legislative, judicial, and executive branches would be required to take this test, and some would try cleverly to impersonate shame when they had none. But the test had questions that revealed these attempts at fake shame. Psychologists had worked very hard on these tests, and all attempts at false shames would be detected. As word spread, more and more citizens signed up to hand over their shame. They could drive themselves or provided a pleasant air-conditioned bus from their homes to the warehouse. More buses were quickly added as citizens and buzzing, excited numbers signed up. As soon as certain elected officials were informed of their low scores of shame, they were escorted to locked vehicles that would transport them to the warehouse. No one quite knew what happened in the locked vehicles, though the rumors were that politicians were, during that final ride, given anything they wanted. This had been negotiated with much back and forth in backroom deals. The vehicles sped across the country, not stopping until they reached the warehouse. The ones with no shame entered a large, empty, light-filled building and stood across from the ones who were handing over their shame. The two rows of individuals stood across from each other wearing masks, which made it appear that everyone was about to engage in a dance. Armed guards, screened for their capacity to resist bribery or threats, stood all around all of them watching. Those in row one clutched their bags of shame, the bags heavy as though they contained broken, dripping melons. Some bags would be thick, double-bagged, as shame was both heavy and had a tendency to leak. There was a sharp and bitter odor of rot. They looked embarrassed, shoulders hunched, even if they were handing over this burden. They understood all too clearly what this entailed. They could not meet the eyes of the ones in row two. Some even seemed reluctant to hand over their shame at all, to burden another with it, but that was what they were asked to do. Row two, hold out your hands, announced a voice. I'll end there. Thanks.
Thank you. I love the idea that shame made physical would look like a raw steak. Somehow that feels right. Our next reader is the one and only Paul Harding. Paul is the author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel Tinkers, as well as others. He was a drummer with the band Coldwater Flat, and he's another very helpful professor I have this year.
Thank you kindly, Trumaine. And I'm going to read from Tinkers tonight. I keep meaning to read from my new novel, and I keep having arguments with it. So, and I just, the copy that from which I'm going to read just a little bit of metaphysical, birch bark metaphysics is one that I just found that one of my kids got a hold of when they were younger, and they did, I don't know if you can see this, stinkers. So, you know. So this is just a kid walking through the woods, and so it's dappled creek, dappled sunlight on creek water stuff, the usual. Spring rain made temporary ponds of the deep ruts along the abandoned tote roads. The water was shin deep and the color of iron cream. Howard had to walk through one sometimes because it extended across the width of the entire road and into the woods. As he waded through, his feet pushed up milky, rust-colored clouds of mud from the bottom, out of which spurted schools of bright green tadpoles, disturbed in their rapid and fragile evolutions. The tom-tom tap of a pileated woodpecker sounded from somewhere in the woods to Howard's left. He thought of leaving the road to find it, but decided not to. Grass covered the raised spine of the road where it was not submerged in the metallic water. Howard walked along this narrow path. The road originally had been more or less straight, but once abandoned, the woods had shifted it over the years, canting lengths of it to the left or right, skewing it and encircling it above, so that walking down it was like walking through a tunnel. Light filtered down from the sky in various amounts. The branches of maples and oaks and birch leaned across the road toward one another and intertwined and became nearly indistinguishable, their leaves mixed up, apparently sharing common branches, as if after so many mingled seasons, the trees had grafted into one another and become a single plant that produced the leaves of several species. What looked like the road was, in fact, merely a shift to the left or the right, or a dip or a gradual rise. And the way the clouds moved, mostly invisible above the canopy of trees, now revealing the full light of the sun, now obscuring it, now diffusing it, reflecting it, and the way it sparkled and trickled and gushed and flooded and spun, and the way the wind dispersed it even more among the flickering leaves and twitching grass, all combined to make Howard feel as if he were walking through a kaleidoscope. It was as if the sky and the ground were turning end over end in front of him, around in a circle, so that the earth, as it swung up over the sky, dropped leaves and spears of grass and wildflowers and tree branches into the blueness, and as it rolled back down toward its proper place, in turn, received a precipitation of clouds and light and wind and sun from the sky. Sky and earth were now where they belonged, now side by side, now inverted, and now righted again in one seamless, silent spinning. Heedless animals picked their way through this turning thicket. Birds and dragonflies dropped onto twigs and took off again for the skies. Foxes padded over clouds and stepped back onto the forest floor without a pause. And thousands of tadpole tails flickered down from the watery ceiling and then sank back to their muddy nests. The light, too, shattered like a vast plate and rejoined itself and splintered again. Shards and chips and glowing glass and backlit wisps of it turning in hushed and peaceful exchange and saturating everything Howard saw, so that all things themselves finally seemed to dissolve away and their shapes be held by nothing more than quills of colored light. Thank you kindly.
Thank you, Paul. Our next reader is going to be Kaylee Jones. Kaylee is another great professor I have. She's the author of the novel A Soldier's Daughter Never Cries and the memoir Lies My Mother Never Told Me.
It's an honor to be here. I wrote this the morning after I watched the Ken Burns Hemingway documentary, and it was published the next day in the Daily Beast. Last night I watched episode 3 of Ken Burns Hemingway documentary on PBS. I'd watched the first 2 the night before. Very well produced, interesting writers talking about Hemingway's influence, Tobias Wolff and Edna O'Brien among them, but nothing earth-shatteringly new. Already in the 2 first episodes, the division between the man and the myth is starkly apparent. By episode 3, Hemingway's unraveling, drunk all the time, self-medicating with pills and rivers of booze, trading in one wife for another as if he were discarding old clothes. Imagine my shock when suddenly in episode 3, appearing on our huge TV screen was my father, dressed in his soldier's uniform, the photo I love and often use when writing about him. I heard the narrator saying, "A young veteran, James Jones," and I instinctively sprang bolt upright on the couch. Here's the background on this. In 1950, Charles Scribner sent galleys of From Here to Eternity to Hemingway, hoping for an endorsement. What Scribner got back was a letter so vile, so cruel, so ugly, it is still hard for me to believe Hemingway wrote it. He compares my father's writing to snot. He calls him a phony and a coward. And he was a wounded combat veteran of Guadalcanal. And Hemingway ends by saying he hopes my father kills himself. The screen cuts to Tobias Wolff. My heart was pounding. I was afraid he was going to defend Hemingway. He did not. Looking bereft and slightly embarrassed, Wolff explained that Hemingway wrote many such letters, attacking old friends, writers, even his own family. But this is the letter they chose to illustrate Hemingway's state of mind at the time. And how sad and unfortunate, said Tobias Wolff. This was the first time I'd heard that letter read aloud. I knew about the letter. I'd read the letter. I can't even count the number of writers, critics, students, professors, and friends who've asked me about this letter. How did my father feel about this letter? How the fuck do you think he felt about this letter? At the time the letter was written and sent to Scribner, I wasn't born. It wasn't even a thought in my father's mind. My father didn't meet my mother till 1957, long after his first novel was published. But years later, he did tell me that he felt sorry for Hemingway. The man had thought his work was finished, that he would never recover from whatever malevolent depressive state had taken over his mind. He was not well, said my dad, and who can blame a man for that? When my father was dying, and I mean literally dying, as he lay on the couch in a bathrobe, fighting for breath, he told me we were now going to read some novels together to prepare me for college. I was 16 years old. 3 of the books we read together were The Sun Also Rises, A Farewell to Arms, and For Whom the Bell Tolls. He explicated the hell out of those books for me. He helped me learn what subtext is and how emotion, sadness, grief for what is lost bled from those pages. This, through Hemingway, is how my dad told me he was going to die. This is what I remember most about my dad's last months reading Hemingway with him. My dad explaining to me that dying isn't the worst thing that can happen to a person, and my open-mouthed horror at the suggestion. He still loved, truly loved Jake Barnes in The Sun Also Rises, who carries the deaths of those he knew and lost in battle for the rest of his life, who writes about the poor steer in the bull ring, trying to calm the virile wild bulls who know what's coming. That's him, my dad said. That's Jake Barnes. Do you see? He loved Robert Jordan in For Whom the Bell Tolls, who knew all along that blowing the bridge was a suicide mission and is too wounded to run and chooses to die alone at the end, waiting for the fascists to come up the mountain. He's going to slow them down, you see, said my father. He's saving others, people he loves, and that's what counts. And at the end of A Farewell to Arms, my father pointed out the subtle, exquisite use of imagery, the cafe where Frederick Henry goes 3 times while he waits for Catherine to give birth. 3 times he goes, and 3 times he orders the daily special. And it is in the repetition of that daily special, which in the morning, Frederick eats with gusto, but then he returns to the hospital to very bad news. And by the time he returns to the cafe in the evening for the 3rd time, after both Catherine and the baby have died, he can't even look at the food. The emotional impact of Frederick's loss, my dad explained, hits the reader here. And my dad would allow maybe one lone tear to roll down his lined face, still talking, still explaining why Hemingway's work mattered to him. This is why I still teach Hemingway and why I still argue and defend his work. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kaylee. Really well read. Our next writer and reader will be Roger Rosenblatt. He is a memoirist, novelist, essayist, and playwright. He's the author of works that have been translated into 14 languages. 5 of his books have been New York Times Notable Books of the Year. He received the Kenyon Reviews Award for Lifetime Literary Achievement, among many, many other awards. Roger?
Thanks, Trumaine. This is an old book. This is from Kayak Morning, a book on grief occasioned by the death of our daughter, Amy, who was a doctor and a wife and a mother in 2008 at the age of 38. The book's premise is an impossible pursuit. I invent a woman who is a psychotherapist in the book, and she asks me at one point, "What do you want?" And I say, "I want her back. I want Amy back." And she says, "Then you must find a way to get her back." So that's what this book is. One morning I go off in my kayak in an impossible pursuit, an impossible quest. And along the way, I think and observe. Death is soundproof, silence unspeakable. I am part of the silence in my silence. The heart yearns in silence, the mind rages in silence, decides in silence, betrays in silence. The conscience roils, plots, lies in silence. In silence, the rumination, the meditation, the vow. We search in silence, war in silence, regret in silence, love. We love in silence. Think of that. Water heals itself. Am I the dead one? If I am dead, I am unable to lie down, which would suggest I am not dead. I am alive with memory. I can weep and I can praise. These ducks, for example, in arrowhead formations over the Atlantic, and the Atlantic herself that gushes in the half light, and the beach that contorts to shapes of angels on tombstones, halls, hunchbacks, lovers lying thigh to thigh, and the driftwood from a mackerel schooner that still bears the stench of the catch, and the trees that stand together like farmhands on a break, and the slant of the sky and the shingles of the sky, and a cloud like Tennessee, and this creek and this small boat and my living and my dead, Ave. Our daughter dies and there are those who carried her. I shall die and there will be those who carry me. On and on down the cobblestones of the village, through the swales of the dunes, on and on we bear one another into the bruised, dark waters. The burdens of the generations, the burdens of burdens, past the heaving ribcage and the bloodshot eye, remembering, forgetting, and remembering again. We are what we never were, hardly alone. At the end of the morning, everything is calm and slow moving. I feel the cold breath of the sea. A transparent worm disappears into a wave. A great blue heron parks itself on a dock across the canal and looks skyward, as if trying to remember something. There is just enough wind to make one appreciate it. Fish caught and released nurse their bloodless wounds. Let the shiners chatter, let the wind touch me. Let the crabs hide, let the mussels hide, let the jellyfish bloom. Let the clouds shift, let the ripples from a small boat embrace the waters of the world. That's an echo from Theodore Rector. Drifting again, I looked down into the water of my birth, of our birth, the fluid in our bodies, the salt of our blood. A white gull poses on the dock of the yacht club, fresh as a girl. A blue claw crab settles on a stone at the base of the dock. He is done with prowling for a while. A dubious duck treads on a gray slab on the shore above, its brown and gray down lifted by a breeze. A dragonfly threads a course among the reeds. My hands close on the air in an unconscious prayer. In every heartbreak, beauty intrudes. I am willing to be taken. The winds touch my wrist. I hear the caterwauling of the crows. I taste and smell the clammy air. I see everything. Art does not make up a life. Experience does not make up a life. And death does not make up a life either. I don't see why eternity has to last forever. Those whom I have loved and who have loved me, no matter what happened to dilute that love or to cool it or even to drown it, I should like to gather them all on that far shore and thank them. They were my life. Love conquers death. No celestial jury will bring Amy back to me. I will not see her either, no matter how many others want me to. She will not talk to me. But in the time since she died, I have been aware every minute of my love for her. She lives in my love. This morning, when I climbed into my kayak and headed out, I knew that I would be going nowhere, as I have been going nowhere for the past 2.5 years. But my love for my daughter makes somewhere out of nowhere. In this boat, on this creek, I am moving forward, even as I am moving in circles. Amy returns in my love, alive and beautiful. I have her still. Grief, the state of mind brought about when love, having lost to death, learns to breathe beside it. See also love. I aim my boat toward the shore. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Roger. Okay, everyone, that was our last reader. So that means that's it for the evening. So see you later. Take care. Good night. Bye, everyone.